One of the things I've discovered about knowing God's will is that it's always in response to ongoing prayer. And I think prayer is that vital connection and relationship dependency upon God. And prayer brings us to the place where we are prepared to be dependent upon God more than we are ourselves. So if you're ever in a place where you're wanting to know God's will for something specific or even generally, it's always going to be in response to prayer. And then that prayer brings us, as I mentioned a couple of days ago, to a test as to whether we're willing to know and to do God's will. And then thirdly, I think we need to recognize that God's will only be revealed to us in the context of what he's already said. He's never going to go against his sort of revealed will. So everything that's here in the Bible is never going to be contravened by anything that God wants us to be and do. And then I would say that sometimes then circumstances can be a helpful guide, but in and of themselves they never are, because God often brings us in circumstances to a place of sheer dependence upon him, so that what then looks impossible for us only becomes possible with God. So I don't think that circumstances on their own are a reliable enough guide, but there's certainly something to bring into the whole picture of things. But if God ever puts you into a place where you think it's now impossible in your own strength, if it's still God's will for you to do something or to become something, he will also give you the faith and the assurance that he's the one that will do it. I've often quoted, that he is faithful, and the one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. So that's the other sort of aspect of knowing God's will. And then I suppose the absolute clincher to knowing God's will is that when you do know God's will, it always brings with it a peace and assurance that is not the type of peace and assurance that the world can give. And I think that that's the absolute clincher. When you know, because God has revealed to you, and he gives you an absolute peace which is not dependent upon anything that is sort of here in the world, as it were. It's a peace that goes beyond. And so as you pursue God on a day by day, moment by moment basis for knowing his will, I want you to be encouraged that it's going to be in response to it's going to be in response to prayer with God. That prayer will bring us to a place where we're willing to know and to do his will, that he'll never contravene anything that he's already revealed. Circumstances may, in and of themselves, not be enough as a reliable guide. And when we do have a knowledge of God's will, he will always bring with it a peace. And those are a few things that I have found very helpful to keep me in the place of knowing God's will. But the best advice that I can give to you is to be in that place on a day-by-day basis, rather than sort of big moment by big moment. A lot of Christians seem to only, make these searches for God in the big moments of life. But I've found that some of the biggest decisions that I've ever sort of made in life have actually been just the smallest step of many that have already been taken, and that keeps me in the place of knowing God's will. So be encouraged that your day by day, daily walk with God is keeping you in God's will, and trust in him. Amen.